The city of Birmingham, Alabama was founded in 1871 with hopes of exploiting the area's natural resources to complement the burgeoning iron and steel industries as the nation recovered from the Civil War. One of Birmingham's early developers was the industrialist Colonel James Withers Sloss, who began staking his claim in the furnace industry in 1880 by establishing his company that would become Sloss Furnaces. By 1882, construction of his furnaces was complete and the business was fully operational under the original name City Furnaces. Sloss's business was quite successful as one of several furnaces in Birmingham focusing on the production of pig iron, of which they soon won awards as producing the best iron of their kind. Sloss would come to be the largest producer of pig iron in the world. Having succeeded, Sloss sold his business by 1886 to a group of investors. Colonel Sloss later died in 1890 at 70 years old, but the business continued on. By 1899, the company had undergone some changes and the name of the business became Sloss Sheffield Steel and Iron Company. In the early 20th century, prior to World War I, several components of the furnace's operations were replaced, due in part to advancements in technology in the latter period of the Second Industrial Revolution. The boilers and blowers were replaced, and eventually the blast furnaces themselves would be replaced by 1927 and 1928. Although none of the original structures that were part of Sloss Furnaces in the late 1800s still stand today, almost all of what you see today is over 100 years old, with the oldest standing structure having been constructed in 1902, Furnaces 1 and 2 quickly approaching their centennial benchmark. Although Sloss Furnaces ceased operations in 1971, the structures remained rather than being torn down and liquidated. Sloss would later gain the status of becoming a National Historic Landmark in 1981 and has been operated as a museum open to the public since 1983. Although they were paid a decent wage, the workers of Sloss in the early 20th century worked and often lived in grueling conditions of hard and dangerous labor in extremely high temperature working conditions, especially during the summer in the South. Deaths were not uncommon at Sloss, often due to work-related accidents, while some are a bit more mysterious. Some reports claim that as many as 60 laborers met their fate with an early demise while working at Sloss. Many others were injured or suffered amputations in accidents. There were, at times, cases of disease spreading throughout the crew who were living in on-site employee housing. Of all of the people said to have perished during the almost 90 years of operation at Sloss Furnaces, very few can be verified or identified today. 2 workers died in the early days of the plant's operations. Bob May and Alec King were killed in an accident in November of 1882. The 2 men were working high up on the inside of furnace number 1, cleaning the inner walls. Rising noxious gases and smoke from the smoldering iron below caused the men to either become dizzy and disoriented or to lose consciousness, and they fell to their deaths, their bodies burned. Their deaths were documented in the book Sloss Furnaces and the Rise of the Birmingham District by Walter David Lewis. Accidents and disease were not the only causes of death at Sloss. There has been at least one confirmed suicide, in addition to a couple of unconfirmed stories as well. Little is known about Samuel Cunningham, or what else he might have been dealing with in his life. He had recently relocated to Birmingham from Kentucky. It is thought that after having attempted to start a new life for himself in the area, that the reality of his grueling job and limited options took their toll, and he flung himself from atop Alice number 1 into the furnace to his death in November of 1882. Cunningham died the very same week as Bob May and Alec King. John Ritchie and John Staton fell almost 60 feet to their deaths when the scaffolding they were on gave way, dropping the men to the bottom of the furnace on February the 4th, 1892. The New York Times published the story about their deaths and mentioned 6 other men who had also fallen and were seriously injured, but no follow-up can be located to clarify if any of these men later succumbed to their injuries as well. One man was accidentally caught by the machinery of blowing engine number 1 and was pulled into the gearworks of the cogwheel. His life ended with his body being crushed within the machinery. Reportedly, 2 men whose identities seem to have been lost through time were killed when they were hit by extremely hot steam ejected from the machinery that exploded under high pressure in boiler room number 1. One of the most mysterious deaths at Sloss occurred on August the 4th of 1897, when the body of Southern Railway painter Joseph F. Webb was found boiled in a large water tank. His death remained a mystery. Webb had been drinking in a bar the night before he was found dead. Did he find his way to Sloss intentionally? It seems unlikely, as the route he would have taken home would not have led him by Sloss Furnaces. He would have had to taken a detour to get there. Had Webb met his end as the result of foul play? His death reminds me of the famous Elisa Lam mystery from the Cecil Hotel. The story of Webb's death was also printed in the New York Times. With this much death occurring at one location, is it possible that the location is haunted by the spirits of some of those who perished here? Some people think so. In fact, there have been claims of seeing apparitions and reports of strange occurrences happening on the grounds of Sloss for over 100 years. The number of stories of experiences at Sloss Furnaces, some very similar, some different, seem to indicate a number of ghosts may occupy this location. Some have even gone as far as to label Sloss Furnaces as the most haunted location in Alabama. Of the many legends associated with Sloss Furnaces, the most well-known spirit that is said to haunt the grounds is that of a cruel and overly demanding foreman of the graveyard shift, despised by his workers, said to have been named James Robert Wormwood, nicknamed Slag behind his back by his subordinates. The use of the nickname Slag was not a compliment. Slag in the iron industry is, essentially, waste, the byproduct of iron production such as dirt, rock, and other impurities that is separated from the molten iron. He was harsh and unrelenting in his efforts to push his crew to work harder and harder under already difficult conditions. As legend goes, Slag purportedly ascended to the top of Big Alice to perform an inspection, but somehow he fell to his burning death in the furnace. This version of events was doubted, though, by some. It had been said that Slag had never before gone to the top of Big Alice before in all his years. One might infer, as is often the case, that perhaps some of his graveyard shift crew may have had enough of old Slag and done away with him. After the death of Wormwood, the graveyard shift was discontinued altogether. For close to 100 years, there have been claims of at least one particularly aggressive spirit that has been seen by multiple people over great spans of time that appears to be badly burned or described as a burning man who has been known to push or shove people at Sloss, shouting angrily to get back to work. Supposedly, a night watchman was attacked in 1926 while patrolling the grounds of Sloss Furnaces. By his account, while patrolling the grounds, he was given a hard push from behind and heard a voice behind him shout, "Get back to work!" The watchman, confused, regained his balance and turned to see his assailant, but no one was there. He searched the entire plant and saw no one else on the grounds. A particularly strange occurrence took place in 1947 when 3 employees of the plant, some accounts specify they were supervisors, were found unconscious and locked in a small boiler room or closet. Upon being discovered and released from their entrapment and regaining consciousness, the three men gave a terrifying account of coming into contact with a horribly burned man who angrily harassed them to work harder, ordering them to push some steel before apparently attacking them. Samuel Blumenthal, a night watchman, gave an account in 1971 of an encounter that left him shaken. During the night after the final day of operations at Sloss, Blumenthal was conducting his patrol of the plant when he found himself facing a terrible sight. He was approached by a figure that he described as being half man, half demon. This figure attempted to force Blumenthal up a staircase, but Blumenthal tried to resist. This angered the being, which then began to physically beat Blumenthal with his fists. Blumenthal recounted that the figure was the most frightening thing he had ever seen and described the entity as evil. Stories such as these involving this malignant spirit have long been attributed to being the spirit of old Slag Wormwood. As a matter of personal opinion, I'm a bit skeptical of the accuracy of the accounts of Slag, James Robert Wormwood. One of the key reasons for my skepticism is found right there in the name. While it's true that Wormwood is a surname for some families, the word wormwood comes from a plant known to be particularly bitter. The word has been used to describe things as being bitter for much of written human history as a descriptor for bitterness. The surname of Wormwood seems to be glaringly coincidental, if true. It sounds like a long-used method in fiction to name villainous characters with a name that is somewhat descriptive of their personality, and that can be seen in everything from comic book supervillains to Harry Potter villains. Now, I'm not saying that old Slag didn't exist. Who knows? I'm only stating that some of the details sound contrived. Of course, it's not outside the scope of possibility, but it seems likely improbable. Perhaps people have encountered a spirit of a rather unpleasant disposition that haunts Sloss Furnaces, but it's in my opinion that at least the name has likely been fabricated over the years. Perhaps the true name might have been forgotten or lost over time and substituted through retelling of the legend. In fact, some speculate that the story of Slag Wormwood is a more recent legend of just the last 25 years, that Slag Wormwood was mostly fabricated by people associated with Sloss Furnace, the haunted house attraction that took place on the grounds every year in October from 1997 until 2019. There was, in fact, a man named either Richard Jowers or Theophilus Calvin Jowers, according to Catherine Tucker Wyndham's telling in The Ghost in the Sloss Furnaces, who was a foundryman that worked at a completely separate furnace called Alice Furnaces, a part of the Bartleben Coal and Iron. That was also in the Birmingham area. On September the 10th, 1887, Jowers fell into the molten iron while attempting to loosen a bell. The story was mentioned in the September 11th, 1887 issue of the Birmingham Age, or the Daily Age, a local newspaper of the day. In the article, it was reported that after his fall, they were able to retrieve the head, bowels, 2 hip bones, and a few ashes as all that remained of Jowers. Some claim to have observed the ghost of Jowers haunting Alice Furnaces for years after his death. After Alice Furnaces closed and was demolished, some say that the ghost of Jowers relocated to Sloss Furnaces. The former site of Alice Furnaces is where present-day Golden Flake Chips Company is located, approximately 3.4 miles from Sloss Furnaces. According to the late author and regional folklorist Catherine Tucker Wyndham, known for her 13 Alabama Ghosts and Jeffrey series of books, Jowers' own son, John Jowers, had made claims that the ghost of his father had relocated and taken up residency in Sloss Furnaces. This is not the first story I've heard of a ghost relocating, as discussed in my video on the ghost of Sidney Grumlet in Auburn, Alabama. While the account of Jowers appears to be mostly true, um, that of old Slag, James Robert Wormwood, is not so easily confirmed. Perhaps both were true. Um, Perhaps elements of two different people were kind of merged together over generations of retelling. I can see where some confusion may have come into play. For example, Jowers did fall into molten steel at Alice Furnaces, while Sloss Furnaces, on the other hand, had one of its furnaces nicknamed Big Alice, uh, and that's where James Slag Wormwood is said to have died. So that being said, I'd like to point out another key difference that nothing I've found suggests that Mr. Jowers was a disliked or disagreeable person. In fact, from what I've been able to find, it seems that he was well liked by his family, friends, coworkers alike. It seemed like he was a stand-up guy. So shouldn't be any confusion there between those very different personalities. But I think maybe some elements of their stories might have overlapped, perhaps, or maybe not. Maybe they both existed in just two different people, and maybe they both haunt the grounds of Sloss Furnaces. I don't know, but yeah, there is some differences there that need to be kept in mind so that the late Jowers' name won't be tarnished by being compared with Slag Wormwood. Some have claimed to have seen the apparition of a woman on the grounds of Sloss Furnaces. According to legend, the apparition is thought to be the ghost of a young woman who committed suicide on the grounds. It's said that the young woman lived near Sloss Furnaces. Being distraught with shame for becoming pregnant out of wedlock in the early 1900s, it is said she came onto the grounds of Sloss and climbed to the top of the #1 furnace as soon as workers weren't present. She ended her life by throwing herself into the furnace. Over the years, there have been a number of police reports filed with the Birmingham Police Department of complaints people called in of seeing trespassers or people that shouldn't be at Sloss Furnaces, only for the police to not find any trace of anyone having been there. And Sloss Furnaces has had the reputation for being haunted for 100 years, and the legend carries on. People have reported encountering the burning man thought to be Slag Wormwood. Some have claimed to have seen a dark figure that appeared completely black like a silhouette. Could that have also been Slag? Many claims indicate people have felt pushed, grabbed, or struck. Some people have claimed to have heard voices or footsteps behind them, but when they turn around, there's nobody present. Others have mentioned seeing harmless figures that seem to be the ghost of other workers who perished at the furnaces. Some have claimed to have seen figures that appear solid gray. I think that kind of, most accounts kind of, that fits into the category of the other workers who may have passed away there that seem to be harmless, just kind of lost or carrying on what would have been their duties or whatever. I don't know. The site has been investigated by many paranormal investigation groups over the years, and it's been featured on several of the most prominent paranormal television shows. The TAPS crew of ghost hunters brought legendary rock artist MacLeod for their investigation of Sloss Furnaces for Ghost Hunters Season 6, Episode 23. The site was visited by a Ghost Adventures crew and was featured on that show's 5th episode in their first season. Each October from 1997 to 2019, part of Sloss Furnaces was used as a Halloween October haunted attraction that operated under the name Sloss Fright Furnaces. And it was one of the most popular haunted attractions in Alabama. Unfortunately, after 2019, the annual event has been discontinued with no plans to resume. The museum is open most Tuesdays through Saturdays of the year from 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. It is available for self-guided tours or guided tours. They're closed for some holidays throughout the year and for occasional private events. They do at times offer historic night tours. However, keep this in mind, it should be noted that they are specific and that these are not ghost hunting or paranormal investigation tours, and they don't do ghost stories or anything like that. So keep that in mind so you won't be disappointed if that's what you were hoping for. It seems that the museum would like to maintain their focus on the historical significance of the landmark and minimize the focus of their reputation for claims of paranormal and things like that. And that's fair enough. But I hope you enjoyed taking a look at Sloss Furnaces. I appreciate you watching and hanging out with me, and I will catch you next time.